Hi, and thanks for joining me for today's Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. What we're going to be talking about today is a continuation of our enrichment in the classroom. This enrichment is for gifted kids, this enrichment is for non-gifted kids, this enrichment is for any student that seeks to be challenged. Whether it's challenging their thinking, challenging their creativity, just challenging them in general. How can we get kids thinking outside of the box and using their abilities to do new things? So what we're going to be talking about today specifically are what are called enrichment clubs. Enrichment clubs are just as they sound. They're clubs meant to enrich students. And these can be done and set up in various ways. So for example, this could just be something that you are interested in doing. So I know a teacher who is very interested in Dungeons and Dragons. So he just opens up his room after school once a week for kids to come and play Dungeons and Dragons. And some kids come who have never played before and they learn. Some kids know what they're doing and they develop their characters and their worlds. But he just makes a space for them to be able to do this. He's not necessarily getting up and doing a lesson on Dungeons and Dragons. He's just providing the opportunity for students to do this. And of course, that uses a lot of creative thinking and a lot of imagination to be able to do something like that. So it could be something informal like that. It could be something formal. So if you have a gifted program or if you have a like Leader in Me program, which some schools do, then what you can do is once a month you have these leadership teams where students are going to be doing something that involves, enrichment. And so you can set that up in various ways. So it can be very formal, where once a month students or once every other week, students are meeting with you and you are guiding them through these enrichment activities. The suggestion that I would give is that you choose an enrichment activity that you feel passionate about. Because one thing you don't want is for this to be another thing for you as a teacher. If you're passionate about it, if you care about it, just like students, you'll be more motivated to do it. You'll want to do it, not because you have to do it, but because it's something that interests you. And so what I'm going to be talking about today are 5 different enrichment clubs that you might try in your classroom that are fairly simple to pull off and to moderate. And it's going to allow students the opportunity to be enriched in their thinking. So the first one I'm going to talk about is chess. So I run chess clubs at several buildings in my district, and wherever I've been, I've run chess clubs because chess uses very creative thinking. It forces students to be thoughtful about their strategy. It forces them to think about what they're doing before they do it, something that gifted kids have a lot of challenge with. And it slows down their thinking process to where their thinking is more effective. So I really enjoy using chess club for this reason. Now, my level of chess is not that high. I know the basic rules of chess. And so when I work with students, a lot of times they're beginners or they're just starting out. And so I teach them these basics. And eventually, if they get to a point where they can move beyond those basics, I try to come up with lessons or find videos that they can watch that are going to challenge them even further. But eventually what hopefully happens in a club like this is the kids become better players than I am, which is not that difficult, but that they're pushing themselves to that next level of chess. And so it's fairly simple. You just basically need chess boards and students that are willing to play. So I've done this with kids as young as kindergartners and first graders, all the way up until junior high students. So chess club is a good way again to challenge the thinking of students, and it's relatively simple to set up. I mean, you can do it as simply as just providing the boards and the pieces and letting kids play. And kids come and they already have that background knowledge of how to play. It's just a space for them to play. You could have more formal lessons. Sometimes I will run a brief 10-minute lesson on some strategy I want them to think about. So how you set it up is completely up to you. The second enrichment club I want to talk about is what's called a STEM club. So I've talked about STEM opportunities in another Todd Talk, but the way the STEM club works is that you just have a space for students to, again, think outside the box using STEM practices. So the science, technology, engineering, and math. But basically, it's using the engineering design process. So how do students get a problem? How do they try to develop a solution to that problem? And what does that look like? So for example, when I run STEM clubs, I often do what I call the paper airplane challenge, where I ask students to make an airplane that will fly the furthest. And that's what I challenge them to do. And so students research different paper airplanes. They test their own airplanes and what works and what doesn't. And so eventually a final showcase where they are going to fly their plane, and the goal being who can fly the furthest. It's really simple. Takes a few weeks to do this when we're meeting like once a week. And it allows kids to be creative without costing you a ton of resources. So all you need is a stack of paper and the internet, so they can watch YouTube videos on how to form some of these planes and the space for them to fly these planes. And so you are actually encouraging kids to fly paper airplanes in your class, something that sometimes we're trying to discourage them from doing. So it's a lot of fun in that as well. But there are other STEM activities that you can do, and there's plenty of stuff, plenty of resources online where you can look up STEM activities. But a STEM club is basically just a space for them to be able to put this into practice and to be able to put this process into work. So that is the STEM club. A third one that you might consider, and sometimes they can be subject specific, like the STEM club is science and math. But you can also do a language arts. So if you're someone who's really into language arts, or you're really into writing or reading, you could form like a book club. I mean, there are adult book clubs out there where adults read a book and then they get together and have a discussion about that. And that discussion then takes that book to another level, because you're getting different perspectives, you're getting different ideas, you're getting how people saw different things. And so these can be really rewarding. And so you could run book clubs with your students. You could say, hey, we're going to read this book. If you're interested, read it. And then we're going to meet after school and talk about it, or before school and talk about it, or during a study hall, or during your lunch, or whatever. You can set up the structure that you want to do. But the idea here is that students are choosing books because they want to, not because they're being forced to. And they're not having to do, mandatory quizzes to see if they're doing their reading. The motivation here is that other people are going to be doing the reading as well and talking about these books. And so that will motivate them to read. So this kind of fosters a love of reading, which I think a lot of times our schools actually do a poor job of. We actually, foster kids to dislike reading because they're being forced to do it and they have no choice in what they're doing. So giving kids the choice to do this, or giving them, it doesn't have to be necessarily the same book. You could have a theme, and then students can pick different books that they would like to read, and then they could bring that and you could talk about that theme overall in these various books. And that way students are getting different suggestions from other students as books that might be interesting for them to read. You could also do a creative writing club. Creative writing club is just, a space where students can come and write creatively, something that we don't do a whole lot in our schools. And so, this could be writing poetry, it could be writing a screenplay, it could be writing a short story, it could be writing a novel. But typically the way that these manifest themselves for me is it's an after-school club, and students I actually did it in school as well, because we would have a dedicated time for that, and students would just come, and I would maybe give a brief lesson on something to think about, whether it's story structure or character development or things of that nature. And then students would work on their own writing, and they would workshop it, and they would with one another. And the nice thing about these clubs that I've described so far is you don't necessarily have to be the one running them. You have to be the one organizing them, but you don't have to be calling all the shots and leading students along. You can just say, here's something that you might want to do, and then give them space and resources to do that. And so Creative Writing Club is a good way to do that, especially if you love writing yourself. And again, this shouldn't be about, so this is fostering that love of writing, not because you have to write, but because you want to write. And so that's what we're tapping into with a lot of these enrichment clubs, is students are choosing what they want to do, and it's a passion that they have or something that they're interested in. So they're more bound to be motivated as a result. A fourth club that you might would consider is culture clubs. So a lot of times what these look like, especially at high school level, is like a Spanish club or a French club. These are people who are interested in these languages, and they get together and talk in these languages and talk and work outside of the classroom on these languages and what these languages can bring to them. It could be something. I had a teacher that had gone to Korea, and so she was really interested in sharing what she had learned from her trip to Korea. And so she created her enrichment club, which we met once a week, where they looked at the Korean culture, and they got to learn about her experiences. They got to see her pictures of her trip, and got to kind of delve in deeper to a culture that was different from their own. So it doesn't necessarily have to be language based. It can be culture based. It doesn't necessarily have to be foreign. It could be, a culture could be LGTB club. It could be, celebrating a heritage, whether it's Hispanic or African American, or there's all sorts of opportunities. But again, you should not be the one that's calling all the shots. You should just provide a space and a platform for students, and then students kind of drive where these clubs are going. So it could be like they're creating a MLK presentation for the school, or if they're doing a Spanish club, they're having a food get together for parent teacher conference night, and they're providing the food, and it's all a Spanish based food or Mexican based food. So there's lots of things that they can choose to do. The point is that you give them the opportunity to do this, to kind of decide for themselves what this club is going to do, rather than being so structured. The final enrichment club that I'm just going to suggest is peer tutoring. One thing I do not advocate for is having gifted students, when they're done with their work, tutor kids who are struggling with their work. This is not what this is about, because a couple of things are going on there. First off, the student is not volunteering to do this. They're being asked to do this. They're being forced to do this. And secondly, this might not be, just because they got done with their work, it isn't going to grow their own learning by going back and trying to break it down for this student who doesn't get it. And so we want to be encouraging the growth of these gifted students. And so peer tutoring is a little bit different, though. Peer tutoring is voluntary. You have a certain subject area that you're very skilled in, whether it be math or science or language arts. And would you like to work with a student who is struggling with that? And it may not be like a massive struggle, but it may be just a student that needs pushed over the top, needs challenged themselves. And so, again, this could be something that's done during the school day, during study hall, or during, a lunch or recess. Could be an after school, before school. You could volunteer at the library, libraries often will have tutoring clubs, and you can be a part of that. But the idea here is that the one thing as the organizer of this that you need to make sure you're doing is reflecting with students all the time. In other words, just because someone is really good at math doesn't mean that they're really good at teaching math. So are there things, you need to guide them towards, or to point them towards, to where is there, how to take this math and teach others about it? So you just don't want to throw students at other students. You want to be purposeful about, hey, this is what this might look like. This is what you might want to develop. This is what you might want to do. Again, you're not calling all the shots, but you're providing a structure that students can kind of plug in their own knowledge and their own experiences to be able to provide this peer tutoring. And, it does promote leadership amongst gifted students. It promotes them being able to use their gifts and their abilities for something positive, to help others, and to help with the school community. So these are 5 enrichment club suggestions. You can do anything you want. I've had teachers that were really into beading, and so they had a beading club. I had teachers that were really into movies, and so they would do a film club with students. So the suggestion that I'm going to have is that you pick something that you really care about, that you don't do this for the sake of because you're supposed to, but because you want to. Very early in my career, I was really interested in writing, so I wanted to support that by starting the school newspaper. And so we had a school newspaper, and I did this after school as an after-school club, and students just signed up for it who wanted to come, and we then worked on a newspaper together. I've done other things such as creative writing clubs. I've done theater. I've done other things as well, which are basically just spaces for students to come and be able to enrich themselves and practice these activities with others. And so that's what enrichment clubs do. If you're interested, a lot of the enrichment clubs I talked about today are further expounded upon in a book that I wrote for Proofrock Press called Enrichment Activities for Gifted Students, which you see here. So if you're interested in learning further about it, you can check that out. I also talk mostly about nationally vetted programs that exist. And so and I talked about that in another Todd talk, but I talk about that in this book as well.